Simon, really appreciate the opportunity to sit down and chat today.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And appreciate you braving the burst water main down the road in order to get here and cycle through the water.
It's been
and everything.
Quite a journey.
Yeah, exactly. It shouldn't be that much of a journey from Hackney to Kentish Town, but apparently it is. And really, the conversation we were just having a couple minutes ago off camera is really the conversation that I want to continue having today. The topic, as we were saying, is to really delve into strategic thinking within a creative media-led environment, and to unpack a little bit more around your role within that and your thoughts within the industry. But to begin with, it'd be very, very helpful just to know a little bit more about your personal and professional background before we unpack it further.
Sure. So I am Simon. I work as a global strategy director at Ogilvy UK. I'm part of a team that's basically dedicated to Unilever. Unilever has obviously dozens of brands. A lot of them are beauty and hair care brands. So I work specifically for Dove Skin and for TRESemmé as well, this US hair care brand, which is going through like a whole new proposition, big revamp going on. So there's a lot. I have almost always been working in advertising, in strategy, across very different organizations. As you can tell, I'm French, so I've been working in Paris mostly. I moved to London 3 years ago. And I went through the different companies. I was working for La Chose, which is a small creative shop in Paris. Then I went to Ogilvy Paris. Then I've had a bit of a startup experience for 2 years, and then back to the advertising world, Webedia, Jellyfish for a couple of years, and Ogilvy UK. It's pretty new. It's been 6 months now.
Fantastic. And what's the experience like moving from Paris to London? I mean, personally, but also from a work and culture environment. How's that been?
It's a very different work culture, I have to say, especially like in ways of, I guess, dealing with. I feel there's always a notion of conflict when you deal with creative questions, and conflict is part of coming up with great, interesting ideas, because obviously you care about what you want to put forward, and if you have creatives and account people who care as much, then it's going to create sometimes a heated conversation because everyone's kind of like want to defend a point of view and perspective, and that way of dealing with tension, it's never bad. I feel like it's really part of the process. Is very different in the UK than you would have in France. Like all the, I was at Jellyfish before, all the creative we've been working with were French people. We are used, I think, to like this confrontational culture at work, and especially in advertising. So sometimes it's like, it's pretty, gets pretty intense. It's dealt with in a very different way in the UK, because obviously it's much less confrontational as a work culture. So you have to, decode like what people mean when they say, no, it's fine. It's like sometimes it's not fine at all, but that's their way of communicating that back to you. So I have to like change my cultural lens to make it work. But it's very interesting. I feel there's sometimes more rigor in the work in the UK, in the planning culture. So that I like a lot.
Yeah, I have it's an interesting point. I have an organization I work with who are, they're an Austrian company, but the CEO is German, and he wouldn't mind me saying this because sometimes he'll say to me in the room, Ben, you need to stop being so English and you need to be a little bit more German, say it how it is, don't dance around it, and sometimes a little bit of confrontation is okay. Sorry. So it's an interesting point, and definitely I think in a creative environment that positive friction or positive confrontation is what you need to ultimately be creative and take effective decisions and ultimately achieve whatever you're trying to achieve with the campaign.
That's the process. I don't believe anything great has come naturally without any of that type of friction. And it also, again, I feel like caring is just so important in this industry. Like I feel like the best people in the industry are people who actually care about what they do. It's not just a regular job. They want to put in this world ideas that are relevant, connect with people in a very special way, make sense to what, in terms of like differentiation for the brands they develop those ideas for. And that you don't see a lot in people in the industry. And when you do, those are the people you want to get close with and develop a special relationship in order to, find your zone, find your space. I think that's a very important thing to do.
No, definitely. And the topic of this podcast clearly is strategy, hence the title, and obviously that's a big focus of the roles that you've had and also your role today. But with a slightly different lens, when I think about, or when we think about what is strategy or what's the process of strategy, we think about supporting organizations as a whole in understanding what does your current state look like today? Where are you today as an organization? What does it mean to win? Where are you trying to get to? What decisions will you take to get there? And then ultimately, how do you execute? How do you actually make it happen? And how do you track that over time and maybe adapt and iterate? So it'd be great if you could give a bit of a view of how your role and the environment in which you work leverages the core building blocks of strategy, but of course in a slightly different way, considering you're working predominantly with brands.
Yeah. I think my definition of my job in strategy in general has considerably evolved over time. As I was practicing strategy in very different environments. I've been practicing strategy in a publisher environment, and that would mean a very different thing. And my day-to-day would be very different from what it means to be practicing advertising at Ogilvy UK today. Overall, I feel like the most simple definition of what I do is trying to find a path to success for brands, trying to not cut out complexity, but like navigate in a very complicated world, finding a simple path from A to B. Defining a problem is also a massive dimension of the job that's sometimes overlooked. Being able to like very simply express a problem from a business problem that they might have, but take it from a consumer perspective. I think that's usually the translation that we have to do as strategists. You have a client brief, that's the expression of a business problem in the terms of a corporation. Then you have to take that, question it, because sometimes the problem is not where it's framed in the brief. Sometimes it is. And then translate that into, but what does it mean for people that you're trying to reach? Because most of the time it's a business problem. People don't care about business and they don't care about your brand really most of the time. So Ogilvy used to have a very interesting way of framing that in the brief, which was, why should people care? You know? And that for me is the most important building block of thinking about a problem strategically. When you do brand strategy, why should people care about that? You're selling tires. People don't wake up in the morning thinking about tires. So how are you going to find a way? And that's the value it creates. It's like to think about those things and reframe a problem in a way that feels now interesting to people, you know? And you could do that for anything really, which makes the job very interesting, I feel. You could get people interested in anything if you find the right way to frame it.
And not in a confidential manner at all, but for a hypothetical organization that you may be working with, what does a typical journey look like? Relatively high level, but that typical journey step by step from a first brief through to ultimately delivering.
Yes, I think that really depends on what we are briefed on. Say it's a typical global campaign. You are going to get briefed by a client. So we're going to have a moment. They're going to be obviously like going through all the slides, the deck. Most of the time, they're doing a fantastic job at that. I feel like the brief are really good, better and better. Sometimes there's too much, but I prefer a brief where there's too much and it's on you to, kind of like curate what the valuable information is going to be for you to then create that creative brief and take that leap. Then from there, I would have a Q&A to, again, like make sure everything's clear. Is there anything that could be questioned? Is the problem the right one? Any outstanding questions that we might have following the brief? Then we would take some time to develop that creative brief, which is, as I was explaining just before, what is now the business problem formulated in consumers' terms, and that tends to be more and more coming from social, because a lot of clients, especially Unilever, big clients now think about it differently. They want social first, they want earn first, they want things that are happening in culture, and that has to be the starting point of everything we develop from a strategic perspective. So it's not just about an intuition. You obviously can have an intuition, but it's about like, how does it express in culture? How is this problem manifesting in how people talk about it on social? And how can we use things that are happening on social and in culture, which would be naturally discussed without any brands involved? How do we enter that conversation in a way that's relevant? And there's a question of permission. You aren't, as a brand, you aren't allowed in any spaces just because you want it to be, because that's their space, that's people's space. So you can't, you have to understand the rules. You have to understand what's the nature of the conversation, what are the dynamics, and what's your permission as a brand to enter that space in a way that's going to be respectful, not extractive in the way you operate with creators and communities. It's not about just extracting value and not giving anything back. I think more and more brands should be thinking about, you're gonna be leveraging those communities. You're going to be entering a space that's not yours. What are you giving back to those communities? And only if you think about that exchange value, can you create something that's going to be actually interesting for communities to engage with you as a brand?
And when an organization engages with you in this manner, what are the big challenges and pains that they're facing? Why are they ultimately, I don't mean using you as an organization, but what are the pains that they're trying to solve for? What are the challenges that they have that you're ultimately solving?
So the biggest one for me is being average. The last thing you want to be as a brand when you launch a campaign or you have like a brand-led campaign or anything, you don't want to be like that other brand that just goes with the same old thing. So average is the first thing you want to avoid, obviously. In order not to be average, you need to understand what's happening, and you need to work at speed. Speed is the second thing. And that would be, for me, like the main challenge that we're facing. You get briefed by a client, say in August, for a campaign that's going to have to launch in April. That's usually the time frame you have for a big global campaign, considering that there's a lot of rounds of presentation, a lot of production things. So you need that time frame. So between the moment you're getting briefed, the moment you're supposed to lock in the creative idea, and the moment you're going to be launching, there's a lot of time happening. But culture is about short term. Things are happening now. I don't know, there's something happening in culture. There's like a big something that you couldn't have planned, right? There's a big conversation.
It could be geopolitical. It could be more social. It could be purely political. It could be related to anything. But
exactly,
that could happen today. That suddenly in a week's time, it's dominating the conversation.
Exactly. So if as a brand you want to be part of that moment, and you want to leverage the exposure that this moment is going to have and the conversation that's going to come with it, you need to be very quick. But not just quick, because it also needs to make sense. It's not just about like, I'm there, I'm bringing that. You need to have something that's going to be relevant. That is clashing with the traditional way of operating campaigns currently, which is like happening over a lot
long lead time.
A lot of time. So, and obviously trends happen at very different paces. You can have like very short-lived trends like the one we're mentioning now, or you can have something that's more of a thing that's developing over time. So it's a question of like, what kind of trends are you looking into investing? What's also feasible with that time of frame, which you can't really, at the moment, that's just how we operate. Maybe there's a way to shorten that time. Maybe there's a way to think about campaigns differently as well. And I think that's just transformation that we are observing at the moment, because those big brands are seeing the value of operating in culture, and they understand that their way of thinking about a campaign and the pace of culture is clashing at a structural level. So how do you change your way of working in order to because you still need to deploy those big campaigns, global campaigns. So how do you make that happen is the big question. And that's a challenge that we have, I think, from a strategic perspective, because again, the moment you try to crack that idea, which needs to come from social, what you see now might be very different from the reality of social in the next couple of months. So that is a big challenge for me, So the question is what's the material for you to build a strategy on that shouldn't be too short-lived, but still needs to be like on the pulse of
absolutely.
Culture.
And I think there's real parallels with broader strategic planning, even if it's strategic planning for a large-scale corporate. We often laugh if we're in the room with an organization and they say, we're in year 3 of year 5 of our strategic plan, or year 4 of of the 5-year strategic plan, and you say to them, you know, so you, incredible that you knew 4 years ago how and where you would be executing 4 years down the line, and that nothing's changed in the market in the meantime for you to have to adapt or iterate or refine. And it's always that fine balance, right, between longer term strategic planning, that understanding of what do we ultimately want to deliver, but also being aware that you will need to adapt to changes in the market, consumer behavior, whatever it may be, along that journey. But that challenge is pronounced and accentuated even further in a world like yours, where you need to start today to plan for a campaign that will go out in 9 months, but the world can look very, very different during that period. Absolutely. But that's the reality of the lead time required in order to deliver.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now I think we have a framework that really works to think about those two different...
That was going to be my next question, is how have you overcome that?
So there's something that's been developed at a group level that's called world building ideas. And it starts with the very basic idea that brands needs to create world for people to engage with them. So that world obviously has to be unique, has to be like ownable. It's your world, and people can play with it. There's a notion of playfulness, you know, like you create a world, and that's with design with social in mind, of course, because that gives you like more. It's just like more properly designed for what's happening on social. It's more nimble as a way to think about brand building. So you have your world as a brand, and then you have what we call star stories. So star story is more of it's kind of like a classification of different campaigns that you could have, like type of campaigns, core messages that you need in order to build that world over time. And then within each star stories that could take like a lot of different forms. Could be like a content strategy, could be like a big social campaign, could be a PR thing. It does not matter what it looks like, but it should be telling a specific dimension of a story. So that becomes like a very interesting thing for me, because you've probably heard about this thing about lots of littles, which is, I feel like, a very simple way to express what's happening at the moment in terms of the amount of content that you need to deliver as a brand to exist in those social spaces, because the algorithms of big social platforms require a tremendous amount
constant engagement.
Constantly you need to create that freshness, newness. But how do you keep a brand consistent? Because that's obviously, again, another challenge and another tension. In order to build a brand over time, you need a lot of consistency. So how do you make sure, when you have such a crazy amount of content to create all the time, they all need to feel fresh, different, specific to platforms? How does all of that create a story that feels consistent all the time? That's a massive challenge, you know. And that's going to be more and more, because platforms are going to be requiring even more content. Brands need to make sure that they create something that's consistent over time. The long and the short of it, we need to have like a long story to tell, and we still need to have those, activation spikes that kind of like bring that consistent revenue over time. But you need both, and you need like that 60-40 as Les Binet and Field were mentioning as like the optimal threshold between brand-led and activation-led effort.
Just to build off the back of our discussion then, and what we were discussing earlier on before we started filming as well, it's really interesting to note that so many of the key concepts of strategy work are very, very similar, whether we're talking about brand strategy, whether we're talking about the strategic plan for a large-scale manufacturing company, or whether we're talking about a strategic plan of a football team or a tennis player, to be closer to my original world. But it's just the way in which they're applied in different industries. What are your personal learnings so far in your career around the most effective ways in which to go through the process of building and executing strategy and bringing people with you on that journey?
Yeah, I think simplicity, like as you've mentioned, we tend to get lost as an industry in using creating words all the time, creating new processes. And I understand the value of that, because obviously the world in which we operate is changing a lot. So sometimes you just need to rethink about so many conversations about the funnel. Is it still relevant? Should it be designed that way when we know consumers are not specifically following
the classic funnel model.
The classic funnel. They're not going from up to bottom in such like straightforward way. So it makes sense to rethink conceptually about those things. But we tend to spend a lot of time on thinking about those new ways of naming things instead of doing the actual work of getting like deep dive into what consumers, how consumers experience that, For instance, paid in organic on social, there's always been like two different strategies. It's two different teams usually in media agencies or creative agencies when they have paid and organic teams embedded. For consumer, you're scrolling down on your phone. When you see an ad or when you see a content that's just been boosted, that's exactly the same experience. You're seeing exactly the same content, and no consumer would be thinking, "Oh, I'm looking at a paid content." Or sometimes it's flagged as paid, but they don't think paid. They think it's an ad, and it's either interesting and relevant, or it's not. It's not. I'm scrolling. That's pretty easy for them. So why are we making it that complicated? That's usually the thing I'm trying to challenge our teams on is why are we making that complicated when the consumers aren't? Because that should be about them in the end.
Yeah, of course, and I mean, especially it's compounded by the fact that in the day and age we live now, people are taking those decisions in quite literally
seconds, not even
seconds, split seconds. The speed at which people are scrolling and taking decisions on what they engage with or not. What I'm also interested to hear your take on is through the process that you deliver with brands and the strategy that you build and then execute. What's the balance between leveraging structured and unstructured data, by which I mean structured data, big data or large data sets from other campaigns, market reports, consumer behavior reports, with unstructured data, sitting down with key individuals from the brand, for example, and interviewing them, hearing their ideas, hearing their thoughts, what are their challenges, what are their pains they're trying to overcome. How do you balance these two?
You're right to flag that because that's a massive challenge. I think that we have, strategic development is often sacrificed in a process. When you have like a very short turnaround, usually you try to get as much time as possible for creatives. So sometimes, most of the time, you're being asked to deliver a creative brief in like 2-3 days. Are you, in those 2-3 days, considering that you also have meetings throughout the day, are you actually able to run all the things that you're supposed to run in order to understand the consumer? Most of the time you don't. So you rely on experience, you rely on a couple of data points that you grab from reports, from that kind of things. I really think that strategy is about taking out rather than adding.
Yes.
So I feel it's usually more helpful to have in a brief one piece of data that you feel is really helping cracking the thing, rather than having tons of things that are all interesting in themselves. And I used to be that planner, and we've all been that planner, I think, at some point, because you feel like you need to give as much as possible to creatives. You're like, now you know the industry, now you know the consumers, because you have all that data, and you should be able to understand. They don't work that way, and no one works that way. You need to be biased in a way. You need to frame it a certain way and be like, I think intuitively there's something more interesting, creatively speaking, for us in that one piece of data. Could be like a striking fact, like a freak fact. You're like, oh my God, this data is insane in itself. And if it's insane for you, it might also be for the consumers. And that could be like a great fuel for creative, because it's revealing attention, for instance. I was working on it's been a while ago, so I can talk about it now. I was working for a beauty brand, and we're launching this new moisturizing range for the body. And we were facing a difficulty, which was so that was designed for women. A lot of women in their 30s, 40s. They just don't think about moisturizing their body for a very simple reason, which is it takes a lot of time. It's annoying to do. It usually sticks to your clothes. There's a lot of reasons not to do it, and you also don't face the consequences when you do it, because you're not showing off your body all the time. You're showing your face. You know? But there was an interesting data point where you could see that basically a lot of them were obviously like moisturizing their face every day, but they would not for their body, and there was a tremendous gap between the two. And it's interesting as like a comparison, because it's revealing attention. Why would you be when it's exactly the same? I mean, no, it's not exactly the same skin, but like it's still your skin. And you dedicate all the amount, like all the effort into like a fraction of like 6% of your total skin surface is face. So why would you leave the 94% completely, just
absolutely.
So that was an interesting element, and that was kind of like enough of a piece of data to build that tension that I was then bringing in the creative brief. So to your question earlier, yes, you need to feed on a lot of data. Practically speaking, most of the time you don't have that luxury. So you tend to like pick from experience again on like an element that you feel there's a tension in there, that you feel there's something that's interesting. You feel there's something that has enough to bring that emotional narrative that then would bring like an emotional perspective on whatever you have to say, because we're dealing with emotions when you doing advertising. You need to say something of an emotional reality that people don't especially articulate sometimes.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the emotional side, I suppose it comes down to storytelling and a critical part of strategic planning, but then the execution, again, whether it's for a large corporate or whether it's for a brand, is telling a story. And telling a story could be down through an organization to engage and motivate the employees, the various team members. It could be telling a story to the board or private equity. It could be telling a story to the outside world about your value proposition and your products and services. I suppose a key part of your role and the role that Ogilvy play is telling a brand story and conveying that. What are some of the challenges that you see, or the ways in which you as an organization, you as an individual, look to convey and tell the story of a brand or of a strategy?
I think there's story and story. Obviously, that's our role. Ultimately, we need to tell a brand story, or through a product lens sometimes, or like sometimes a brand lens. In order to create a great, interesting story, something that's going to like mark people and they're going to be like, wow, I was not expecting that. I didn't care about your tires, about whatever you're selling. Now I do care because you're bringing that message or that storytelling in a way that resonates with me. Now, the difference and the unlock for me from a strategic perspective is the quality of the insight you're going to be leveraging. And again, it's one of those words in advertising where everyone's like insight. It means a lot of different things to different people. If you're asking different people in the industry, most likely they're going to bring you a different answer. But I feel like the quality of the insight, so the quality of that initial tension expressed in an emotional way, it's not just like, consumers now want product that help you. It's not that. An insight, it's not just like an observation. It's not just I wish I had that kind of thing. It's really a deeply anchored tension that brings the effect should be, oh wow, I never thought about it that way, but it feels exactly how I feel, And if you and that's extremely complicated to get to. That it takes expertise. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of talking to people, getting engaged with them, not having any bias in the way we think about subjects. That's an interesting use of GenAI, actually. Well, one thing that I do more and more, because we all very biased in the way we think about subjects. I'm working a lot on beauty and hair care. Obviously, a lot of the time it's product designed for women. So it takes a lot of like, you need to think about it completely differently.
You need to put yourself in a different mindset already.
Completely. And a good way of using AI in that sense is asking basically whatever LLM you're using to think about the subject in the way your audience would. Yeah. So say you are advertising to Japanese women in their 40s, and you want to sell them a cleansing product. I'm going to input a lot of things through Open, which is the GenAI model that we have for WPP. And I'm going to say, now you're going to be that person. And I'm going to be inputting a lot of elements that we have on those communities, this audience. And I'm going to be like, well, now you're going to think about cleansing from your perspective. And I'm going to have a chat with GenAI in this sense. Because it's pretty good. It's not good at dealing with tension. It's not designed that way, but it's pretty good at keeping a perspective consistent If you say you need to behave like this person, then it's going to keep it consistent throughout. And it might unlock things that you would have never thought about, you know? Like, that's actually interesting. And then it's on you to decide what's the tension and what's interesting for you moving forward. That, for me, is an interesting use of GenAI in strategy.
So just to close, and we've had a pretty wide-ranging conversation, but we've touched obviously upon AI and GenAI and the impact and influence of AI within all industries, but of course, very specifically within the creative industry and that of advertising and media. What's your view? I mean, of course, it's already having a significant impact, and you outlined how you use it anecdotally, but what's the impact of AI on the creative industry and on brand strategy?
Yeah.
The positives, the benefits, the good, the bad, the ugly, I suppose.
Yeah, it's a big question. Basically, I think overall it's good to think about it as like how it's going to be creating value, not how it's going to be allowing us to optimize everything. Because it still very much is a creative industry and it should always be about creativity. Then it should also be a way for us to reflect on the new consumer behavior. I myself use ChatGPT sometimes when I'm comparing different products. I would like take a couple of pictures and be like, can you help me decide? Because sometimes you just like you have like so many options. You're like, I have no clue.
You mean for you as a consumer?
For me as a consumer, you know? And obviously we don't have the exact data on it, but we can assume that it's becoming like more and more of a behavior for people to be using ChatGPT instead of Google or other search engine. And you see usually a drop in usage when someone's using ChatGPT as like a regular thing to inquire about brands. They're not going to be using Google as much. So it's really a shift that we're observing.
Of course.
And when they are locked into ChatGPT for their day-to-day queries, then they're going to stay in that world. So what it means for brands is, how do you think about, like, first, is your brand appearing when those consumers are inquiring about, you know, whatever, like deodorant, that kind of thing?
There's a huge conversation now around, I mean, previously SEO budgets were huge. And now it's not so much SEO budgets, but it's applying some of that budget.
Geo.
Geo.
Yeah, it's completely shifting, but it's more or less the same. I mean, obviously it's happening in a very different way. We don't have as much information as how the ranking is happening. You know, all of that is more of a black box. But what we know for sure is that when someone inquires on whatever LLM and your brand doesn't come out, that's an issue. Because that means that LLM doesn't have the awareness level that it should have. Or maybe there's a gap between actual human awareness and LLM awareness, and you want to close that gap, you know? So at least being aware of that, understanding how agents function, and because they're going to be playing a role as well in shopping, they're going to be the ones clicking on the ads. So the question for us as advertisers is, yes, you've been thinking about that ad for a specific audience, but have you thought about LLM as an audience? Have you thought about agents as an audience? Because that becomes new audiences you need to think about.
Because if for me as a consumer, I want to order a particular protein powder, something stupid, and I don't want to sit at work and at the office and take that decision, so I engage my agent to do that on my behalf. It's then taking the choice between, well, am I engaging with On Nutrition versus Maximus versus a plethora of other brands?
So what's going to be governing that decision? We absolutely need to understand how agents are also working differently if they're going to be coming from, you know, OpenAI or another LLM. You know, there are subtleties obviously in the pre-training material, but also in the way those models operate, in how they make choices, how they click on ads or not, you know? All of that we need to understand, and it's going to be like, for me, like a major element as a strategist to incorporate in how we think about campaigns, because that becomes a new type of audience that you need to think about. Yeah,
very, very interesting. And maybe just absolutely finally, just interested in your 30-second take on the challenge, but also the opportunity that comes with this huge rise in the use of AI, because conceivably myself, I could create a decent advert for whatever product it may be, and a decent campaign, and I could be very, very creative in that, and I could be very quick in the way I do that, just using a desktop machine or an iPad. So with that level of saturation of content, which is now being shoved out into the world, how then from a strategic standpoint does an organization, does a brand cut through that noise and, as you said, go from being average to leading the conversation?
I would say the same as a great advertising campaign. It needs to be anchored in something that is emotionally attention for people, as in attention, like something that actually is something that's driving their choice or their perspective on life. If you don't understand that and you just like create
just churn content,
it's just like, you know, going to be bland, and it's going to be like, you know, what's going to be the human quirky thing that you bring inside the content, I think is going to be like also how you cut through the clutter. How do you bring human back in an AI world? Because it's going to be like, a human is going to be currency at some point. If everything's just GenAI, then how is humans going to be like your special sauce? You know?
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's a view that I share, which is the role of strategy through professional services, whether that's from a media standpoint, advertising, whether it's corporate strategy. It's how do you most effectively combine the benefits that come from AI, from an analysis standpoint, from an idea generation standpoint, with ultimately enabling human beings to take better decisions.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it still has to come down to a human being taking a decision.
Of course.
Whether it's the building the strategy or the executing of it.
Absolutely. And not delegating intelligence to GenAI. Because at the end of the day, the risk as well, just to be fair and bringing the risk as well, is that we all create brain atrophy, you know, and we observe that more and more. Like the more you, I'm not saying you should not use it. I think it's a fantastic tool. I use it every day. I think it's great.
I completely agree.
But let's just make sure that we keep the thinking and that you use GenAI for what it's actually used for, you know? Like, for instance, messaging matrix. Yeah. It's an exercise that is so time intensive. It takes a lot of time. Yeah. I don't really see the value of having a human spending that much time into finding adaptations. So that is for me like a great use case for GenAI, you know, because you're not delegating something. It's just like it makes sense.
Yes, of course.
But let's be aware of atrophy that could happen.
I think brain atrophy is a very good way to put it. Well, look, Simon, I think that's a good place to leave it, and really appreciate the time, especially as we were saying.
Thanks for having me. That was a great conversation.
No. Really, really interesting, and look forward to hopefully chatting more further down the line.
Let's do it.
Thanks. Thank you. Cheers.